Hey, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, folks. If you don't know who this gentleman is, this is the one and only Mathew Ehret. He is from CanadianPatriot.com. A brilliant geostrategic, geoeconomic mind. I mean, a scholar and a gentleman and a handsome devil to boot. And with that being said, Matt, Happy New Year. It's good seeing you, my friend. It's been a while. I'm glad you're back.
Happy New Year to you too, and it's always great to be black.
Always, always. Matt,
It
lots of
sounds
things
like I
going
just
on.
said it's great to be black. I meant to say.
You know what it is? Last time around, we're talking about Black Lives Matter, so maybe that's what happened. I mean, we're living in the new world. I mean, you could be transracial. I could be trans-species for this
It's
point.
all how you feel, right?
It's all how you feel. Exactly. Where do you want to begin, man? I mean, you got a new article up. I think it's powerful. It's right now on Zero Hedge and a few other news sites as well.
Mm-hmm. Sure, we can start with that and then see where the conversation takes us. Yeah, this is the first of a trilogy, which is actually maybe going to become a bit of a quadrilogy, which has the title How a British and Austrian Malthusian Brainwashed a Generation of Americans. What I wanted to do in this series is really just unpack how social engineering works. I want to take a historical perspective, and I wanted, oh, there's the picture of it right there. Sorry about that. So I want to take a bit of a historical perspective to give people some context into how they're being falsely induced to fall into a left versus right paradigm. Both narratives, both camps that they tend to take on, especially when you go around Canada, the U.S., European countries. You know, people think, okay, I either have to be a Keynesian Democrat or liberal, and I have to believe in top-down solutions to economic crises, bailouts if need be. These are people who tend to be very gullible when it comes to things like the Great Reset agenda that's been pushed by Klaus Schwab and the other Davos crowd creeps who really want to use the current crisis, which is always very predictable, as an excuse to say, okay, the solution is let's bring on a new unipolar sort of system run by experts from the top, right? To get rid of the old selfish nation state system, which has proven itself to be just incompatible with human nature. On the other hand, you have a lot of people who tend to support Trump, who tend to be more patriotic in their impulses, but yet who still intellectually have fallen for another variety of the trap, a controlled cage called the Austrian School of Free Market Liberalism, which basically is of the view, follows the view of people like Friedrich von Hayek. Both Keynes and von Hayek, what I get through in this introductory article, were co-creations from the City of London, from the Centre for British Intelligence in the London School of Economics, who in 1932 created a debate. Who would solve the depression better? Would it be the stop all government intervention, government role, and just let the free markets repair the economy, which is what Hayek had said? Or would it be just government centralized control along the Keynesian line? Both of them were set up to obscure the reality that the British Empire, which for those amongst your viewers who don't know this, the British Empire is still very much alive today, and that this was and is the international deep state that's centered and coordinated from London. They were afraid of the reemergence of the American system of political economy that had last been crushed with the death of William McKinley in 1901, who was the last Lincoln president who was assassinated when he was trying to bring back protective tariffs, productive credit for the development of infrastructure that would define the behavior of capital, which was always what came out of the Constitutional Convention in 1787 from the works of Benjamin Franklin, Alexander Hamilton, John Jay, Henry Clay, Henry C. Carey. These are people who ended up forming the Republican Party in 1856, who organized Lincoln's economic policies. And this is the thing that's been pushed. This is the real patriotic impulse, which has been resisting this City of London Wall Street operation, which has always been there, again, going back to 1776 and before that. And this is what was being reborn. These forces took power again as Franklin Delano Roosevelt was coming to power, and really, I mean, declared a serious war against Wall Street and the City of London financial cartels that were trying to create a banker's dictatorship as early as 1933. So they wanted to get people to be just really confused and not understand what this American system of political economy was, that is not just top down, it's not just bottom up, it's something outside of that controlled paradigm. And unless people today understand how they've been hoodwinked, they're going to fall for all sorts of traps that could lead into civil war, which would be really only to the benefit of those oligarchs who never forgave the United States for declaring independence in 1776 to begin with.
Very well said. It's very important that people understand the groundwork. And I think the last time you were on, you described that 1776 is not something that happened in a vacuum. Mm-hmm. But there were also things that happened globally that kept the deep state empire, the City of London Corporation's hands tied globally, so that the American colonists were able to get a footing and to overthrow the crown. So, Matt, could you touch base really quick on that? Some of the things that are happening in the world and how some countries were actually helping us during that time that set the footstone into that. And then let's get deep into this Malthusian brainwashing that has occurred. Go for it, brother.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, history is so much more interesting, I think, when you look at it.
We're getting some background noise, Matthew. I don't know what that was. It sounds like an airplane. Okay, go ahead.
Okay. Do you still hear something?
No, you're clear now.
Odd. Okay. Well, yeah, as you were saying, the history is infinitely more interesting when you are given access to a proper perspective to see it as a struggle between these two opposing paradigms, and when you recognize that there has been this continuum, this continuity of empire that operates with a certain modus operandi, certain techniques of conditioning and brainwashing and getting their victims to divide and conquer themselves, right? So they don't have to do a lot of work. That's been something discoverable as a constant technique of social control going back thousands of years, and the ruling upper crust families that have been sort of maintaining these traditions, these perverse, unnatural traditions, and training their progeny to sort of carry it on and not really discover who they themselves are as human beings, right? We all have sort of equal potentials as babies, but some of this is conditioned out of us. And empires are fascinating, self-contradictory beasts, and just like any parasite, that's really how if you're going to characterize it in some way, you have to sort of look at a parasite. It doesn't really offer the sort of same qualities as other species of the biosphere that all sort of have a role to play within an ecosystem. These things are different. They can really only latch onto a host and reap as much possible wealth for the few, while destroying the means of that society's ability to self-reproduce by destroying creative impulses that are the natural state of a happy, healthy
Matthew, Matt, I apologize. I think we're having some sound issues here. I don't know what's going on. You don't happen to have a headset, do you?
Yeah. Are you getting reverb back at you?
Yeah, there's a lot of reverb.
Oh yeah. Let me try that. Give me 1 second to get my.
Yeah, no problem. All right, sit tight, folks. Matt's going to grab a headset real quick.
Yeah, let's try this out.
Let's give it a shot.
Yep.
And then on your settings, you go to cam and mic, and then make sure that it's configured to the headset.
All right.
Oh, that's much better.
Is it better, really?
Yeah. The cam and mic option on the bottom of your screen.
Yeah.
Right next to start cam, it says cam and mic. If you click that, make sure that your headset is selected.
Yeah, I see speaker, mic, default headphones.
Yep, there you go.
Okay.
Okay.
So do you still hear the reverb?
Yeah, just hit default headphones. You have that selected?
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, yeah, go ahead. You sound better.
Yeah, this is okay?
Much better.
No
yep.
Okay.
Go for it, man.
All right. So I know people's time is valuable, so I'll try to summarize as quickly as I can. The thing we call and label the American Revolution of 1776 to 1783, when the Peace of Paris was formed, really didn't just occur in a vacuum, like you said. It took decades and decades of organizing and preparing the groundwork on many levels for this to happen. The figure of Benjamin Franklin as a leading scientist of the day, who was able to trump every single leading mind of academia of Europe when he focused his efforts on discovering the nature of electricity and then sharing its qualities, an understanding of it with his society. This completely electrified the imaginations of the population in terms of thinking about what are human beings capable of doing, because before that, electricity was something that came out of the sky. You know, lightning was a scary thing that caused sort of fires. All of a sudden you had an ability through understanding to harness it and to apply its power in a way that was beneficial to sustain life of people. Now, when you look at Ben Franklin, he never severed that discovery in the 1750s with his ideas and concepts of natural law. So science and moral law for him, as for every great figure in world history, were two sides of the same thing. It's a fascinating thing to really explore, and this is why the empires put a lot of effort into Delphically subverting the real currents of creative scientific discoveries, because when you read the writings of people who made those paradigm-shifting discoveries, you see the same quality of mind being deployed that's highly moral, that has the same concept of the innate powers of human beings everywhere. And the false science that has been sort of shaped and promoted in our textbooks sort of extracts the soul of the real discoveries, giving us, we're basically told, you know, we're allowed to memorize mathematical formulas and descriptive science, and we're given certain names like Isaac Newton, who had apples falling on his head, and that caused him to discover that the same phenomenon causing the moon to move and apples to fall is the same one, and that he just gave this symbolic formula of the inverse square law. We're told these things, just like we're told Darwin is this incredible universal genius who discovered the causal mechanism for all creative change in the biosphere, and which had application for human society too, called eugenics by Francis Galton a little bit later. But the reality is, again, just like we've been hoodwinked on the economic science side of things, you know, regarding these false polarizations of top-down Keynes versus bottom-up Hayek, both of whom were Malthusian materialists in a very serious way, and both of whom really, actually, when you read their writings, believed in world government. And Hayek, I even cite him at length in my third part of this series. He actually talks about the need for a global police, a supranational police force in the last chapter of his Road to Serfdom. Yeah, to regulate. He basically says the government should play no role in the economy, but you do need to have negative constraints that would be imposed on national governments from a higher power, a higher police force above that. And the issue of population control comes up in his writings too, which a lot of his advocates and supporters don't realize is there. But I didn't answer your question. So, all
Matt, for your headset, for the mic, could you make sure your mic is also on your headset as well?
The mic is on my headset. Let me go back to the cam.
Go to the cam mic.
Audio, microphone. My God, I have a lot of choices for microphones here.
Right now, do you hear anything?
Beautiful. That's it. That's the one.
That's the one.
That's the one. Crystal clear.
Has it been legible? I mean, are people going to be angry?
It was no. It was a little clippy. It was a little staticky and clippy, but now it's perfect, man. Now you sound like you're on a straight up mic and headsets. You sound great.
Okay, well that's good. I bought one of these things, and I guess I didn't have it selected properly. So okay, all right.
Yeah. The headset you're using right now, the Apple headset, it's perfect. It goes great. Okay, cool. Now you talked about F.A. Hayek, and this is the thing that a lot of people don't get. F.A. Hayek's connection to von Mises, okay, and the Mises Institute and the whole entire Austrian economics, because what's happening here, as you know, we're being pushed into various paradigms that are not organically our own, and I think there's a danger in that, because we're not looking at what could be beneficial for us as a country, what's beneficial for America, what's beneficial for Canada. Instead, we're put into these axiomatic schools. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh, we need Keynesianism. Oh, we need an Austrian economics. Could you touch base on the connection between F.A. Hayek and von Mises and the whole entire Austrian school?
Yeah, well, the Austrian school itself, and I'm gonna I really unpack this in part 3. Part 2 deals more with John Maynard Keynes, the Fabian Society eugenicist, in a lot of ugly detail with a lot of quotes by Keynes himself, just demonstrating what a nasty, pederasty misanthrope this figure is, and how he has nothing to do with the New Deal. That was a real, I mean, the New Deal being the policies from 1933 under Franklin Roosevelt throughout that period, which involved a serious political battle against Wall Street, bringing bankers to prison, declaring war to subvert a Great Reset, City of London program for world government in 33. Like, there was a full political battle, and the New Deal, as far as the bank regulation, the investments into large-scale infrastructure, this, we are told, was Keynesian. Not true. That was subversive. Keynes thought FDR was an idiot. FDR thought Keynes was a mathematical ivory tower idiot. They're both on record for their views, and yet we are somehow told this is all this British imperialist Fabian who was the inspiration for the United States recovery out of the Depression. Not true. Part 3 deals a little bit more with the Austrian School, so I'll just start with that one, as you asked. So Karl Menger is really one of the key figures. He was he was the retainer for the Habsburg royal house and the tutor of the heir to the Habsburg dynasty in the 1860s and 70s. So Karl Menger is the sort of originator, the teacher of von Mises, and later on, before he dies, von Hayek. The Austrian School, as we know it, is really just a repackaging of the same British school of Adam Smith, but with certain little twists and differences. But really, it's the same school. What was Adam Smith? Adam Smith, in his Wealth of Nations, published in 1776, was a figure who was commissioned by Lord Shelburne of the British East India Company. This guy ran British intelligence de facto for the period of the American Revolution, and who commissioned Smith to write a treatise justifying why no nation of the world, and especially not the rebellious-minded 13 colonies, should ever play with the idea of using protectionism, having industry, directing credit through national policies for the welfare of the people. That is anti-scientific, says Smith. What you should do is just have a laissez-faire free trade policy where the U.S. should stay agrarian, because, the idea was, well, you have a lot of land, you can make a lot of money with the land that you have by selling agriculture, and you don't need, and you have, we can just bring you slaves that will do the manual labor, and you will make money that way for your local oligarchs. You should not, under any circumstance, do what Ben Franklin was encouraging, which was develop full spectrum economics, which Ben Franklin was doing all the way as early as his 1729 reports on credit, his call for a paper currency, where he goes in depth into the nature of full spectrum economics, the need to develop manufacturers. This is what is taken up by Alexander Hamilton, his leading protege, who takes this even further and develops the core of the American system. So this was this is not an economic doctrine. It was a doctrine to keep nations undeveloped, so that the actual political powers of the British East India Company, the private central banking structures, would be able to infiltrate, subvert, and take down independent-minded nations. This was also what was used later on to stuff opium down the throats of the Chinese under the Opium Wars and many other countries. And the subversion of Indian textile industries as well was done on the basis of Smith's laissez-faire policies. That only works. I mean, I'm not saying that free trade is intrinsically bad. It could be good under conditions where you don't have an actual arsonist going around wanting you to unlock your doors and let them in to burn your house down, right? That's why free trade does have a place to play. Like, for example, in the case of the and I'll get back to the Austrian School as you asked me to, but sometimes, you know me, I like context.
No, take your time. I love your context.
Cool. So in the case of like Alexander Hamilton, they say, oh yeah, but he's anti-Smith. That means he's anti-free trade. No, he actually encouraged a free trade policy, but he did it in such a way that was based around having each of the 13 states have free trade amongst themselves, which they did not have before he got to work with Ben Franklin. They had basically, everybody had their own independent local currencies, local currency issuances, local policy, local regulation. They could have protection between the different states. That was not a nation that could really stand united against empire, that you needed to have a stronger power to be able to fully do battle with the British Empire as it was, and not just as somebody who wanted to try to academically define it, but really as it was. You needed a strong national power, just like today. That's why the empire is afraid of sovereign nation states, because they have strong national power to protect people from the bankers that are trying to get rid of the nation states. So anyway, when you have a policy of national development, big projects, canals, the Erie Canal, roads, internal improvements, education that define the behavior of the nation and the monetary system, in that world, you can have private enterprise flourish very well, and it does flourish very well. There's no need to have some sort of a top-down Marxist or Keynesian central planning with no regard for the sacredness of individuals or personal profit. That dualism doesn't exist in a properly run principled system. So, okay, so Karl Menger basically just repackaged this under, one of the biggest empires of the world still at the day. It hadn't collapsed yet, was the Austro-Hungarian, the Habsburg Empire, with the old dynastic families that represented that. They basically repackaged the Adam Smith program to stop the spread of people like Friedrich List and the policies of industrialization, protectionism of Germany, and that was spreading all across Europe during the 1840s, 50s, 60s. This is what today people call the Zollverein of Germany, the customs union. And it was based, when you look at Friedrich List, the man who brought this into Germany, he was the guy who studied Alexander Hamilton's policies in the United States. He came here with Marquis de Lafayette in the 1820s, remained here for many years. He wrote several books on the American system. We actually host these books in their original copies that you can read online on our website, therisingtidefoundation.net. And when you applied those Friedrich List policies, which later on Otto von Bismarck did, when he broke with his free trade doctrines, it really created a miracle of German industrial progress. And Germany was able to leap in very short periods of time, way ahead of the steel production, industrial production of the British Empire, which had formerly wanted to maintain the sole monopoly on these things globally. So this is all based on the American system of political economy in Europe. And that's what the Habsburgs were trying to subvert, just like Adam Smith had done a few decades earlier. So that didn't work so well at that point. The only way that the American system spread globally after the Civil War, when it was going global, I'm going to talk about that in part 1 and part 3 of my series, and they can go on my website to canadianpatriot.org, and there's a lot of material on that important suppressed history. But it did go global. Alexander II and III, two assassinated czars of Russia, were followers of this process that led into the Trans-Siberian Rail, modeled on Lincoln's Transcontinental Rail, using protective tariffs, state-directed credit. It was happening in Japan. Later on, Sun Yat-sen of China used this as the basis for his creation of a new republic in China. And basically, the only way that was ultimately ended wasn't through some intellectual debate that free trade is better than this American system thing. It was through a bunch of assassinations in the 1890s, all the way up until 1914. And the chessboard was ultimately just kicked over through a lot of artificial manipulation by the British Empire and their vestiges in various countries, and anarchist networks as well, just like George Soros today and his groups. This is not a new thing. The coordination and deployment of anarchist terrorist cells was something which not only led into the assassination of McKinley, but also the czars and many others, including the Archduke Ferdinand of Austria. So basically, it was a world war that they had to create just to blow the shit out of the world, just really just light things on fire and gamble that they could come out newly reformed and on top of the chaos at the end of that period. So this is the period that we now see Ludwig von Mises and his young protege von Hayek, who ends up working for him, coming into prominence. So in 1919, 2021, Ludwig von Mises becomes the lead economic advisor to the Austrian government after the dissolution of the Austro-Hungarian Empire after World War I, right, in 1918. And they have to reform their economy. Basically, von Mises proposes a policy of mass genocidal austerity, massive wage cuts on all social spending, everything. Basically just saying, let the markets figure things out. And today he's celebrated for having stopped the type of effect we saw in Weimar in 1923 hyperinflation, because the other option they were told was top-down money printing is the only solution, kind of like today, to pay your Versailles Treaty impossible war debts, right? That's what the Germans were told they had to be punished with. So von Mises and young von Hayek, who's increasingly becoming converted now into this way of thinking, are advisors to the Austrian government, who applies the first fascist economic policy in Austria at that time, under the control of the Bank of England's Montagu Norman. And it was a test run for what later was done under Mussolini and Hjalmar Schacht, Hitler's finance minister, as the solution to the collapse of the Weimar Reichsmark. Basically, everyone became a billionaire because there was so much money in the system, but nobody was producing bread. So, bread cost you $8 billion. So you might have $2 billion, but you can't buy bread. That was the effect over the course of several months of money printing in Germany, right? What we now suffer from today under the transatlantic is a much more, it's a different, more virulent quality of that process that's now spread out over many more years. The system's much bigger. We have derivatives now. Same principle processes at work, though. So what did Hjalmar Schacht do, who became the Nazi finance minister and the head of the Reichsbank? He basically said, okay, the solution is, bring in your billions of dollars of Reichsmarks. We're going to give you a new currency called the Rentenmark, and that'll have a new valuation. We're also going to cut all unions, all social spending. We're going to fire superfluous employees across the board, and it became years of hell.
Yeah,
however,
this is the Boys of Chicago model, is it not?
Exactamundo, yes, and with a twist. Now, though it was hell, it was a less hell. It was lesser hell than what people experienced under Weimar hyperinflation, so they accepted it, thinking, okay, it's bad, but it's not as bad as it was. Kind of like the sort of thing that you see coming out of Klaus Schwab saying, you will own nothing and you will like it.
You will like it.
Yeah. I mean, it's the same sort of thing. They know that what they want to bring into shock therapy and trauma on their victim populations here under the collapsing transatlantic is a period of sustained pain, at which point we will accept willingly having all of the things we take for granted today removed from us, because we'll at least be able to eat for once. So this is the sort of thing which has been tried again and again. It always results in the exact same thing. The Austrian school, like I said, it evolved in conjunction with the pan-European movement. So when you look at a lot of the leaders of the pan-European movement, which formed the basis of this was set up in 1923 by a grouping of leading oligarchs representing the one section of the old nobility, the black nobility. Otto von Habsburg was a key player in this. This was the basis for the European Union later, and the idea of transcending nation-state systems in Europe by creating a federation of Europe. A lot of the key players who are very high up, and again, I threw out Otto von Habsburg. There's several others that I write about in my article. They all become members of the von Mises Institute in 1947 that was set up by von Hayek before he really settled into the United States. And his minions like Friedman and others, Milton Friedman, continued this work through think tanks throughout the 50s and 60s into the 70s, when they finally basically took back control after the Keynesian Bretton Woods systems were sabotaged. They were sabotaged in 1971 when the dollar was floated, and we were told the age of Keynes is over. Now we're entering the age of liberalization of everything and consumerism and monetarism, which is where the Austrian school's policies were put into action in places like Chile, under Pinochet in 71. Earlier there was Goulart's presidency in Brazil was undone and ousted under a similar Pinochet-like coup orchestrated by Kissinger and the elites from the West, who again wanted to just put in a liberalized Austrian school real policy system, which could only be done under dictatorship, because people would never willingly just vote to have all of their social safety nets, minimum wages, unions, everything that is part of keeping society above water. People wouldn't just vote to allow those things to be removed. So you need to have a Pinochet, you need to have a dictator of some form to impose that from above, which is what Hitler later on did, or in the case of the Austrian or Italian governments of the 20s and 30s, we had the same thing happening there. So this is what was later extrapolated upon under Reaganomics, Thatcherism, when they deregulated the banking system with the Big Bang in '86, that created universal banking, too big to fails, that created the conditions as well of deregulation in the United States that led to the killing of Glass-Steagall, and again, sort of the replication of the same bankers dictatorship model that Jacob Rothschild already had talked about in the 70s, when he said, we have to get rid of these Glass-Steagall bank separations between speculators and investment banks and versus the savings banks and commercial banks that were all separate entities. You couldn't speculate with people's savings or clean deposits during that era all the way up throughout the 60s, 70s. And Jacob Rothschild gives a speech that I cite quite a bit, where he says we have to get rid of this and create a new multi-headed hydra to regain control of the system that we want to influence. And this finally culminated with the killing of Glass-Steagall in '99 and the deregulation of derivatives completely. That created a completely new paradigm of surreality, right? People had no clue what real value was anymore. They already had a tough time before that discerning what the difference is between need versus want, but it became really bad and parasitical after the year 2000. And economics became increasingly just who can gamble better with better high-speed trading without any concern for productivity, reality, human beings. That was like not even a consideration in the equation. So of course that was going to blow it, as bubbles do, and that's what we're living through right now. And those who orchestrated this whole mess from the top never cared about the money. They really only cared about providing the solutions to the problems that they created. And in the case of today, we're going back to the real nasty soul of Keynes making a comeback in the form of the Great Reset solution, which wants a Green New Deal. So they use the term New Deal, right? Because now you're supposed to think of it as a Keynesian thing. But really, I mean, this has nothing to do with what actually the New Deal did from 33 onward. And Keynes, in his system, you cannot differentiate between the value of a paycheck going to a digger of random holes or somebody building solar panels versus a paycheck for the same quantity of money for somebody actually building a dam or a machine tool or something really useful. For them, $50 is $50 is $50 because people will use it regardless of the value of what they're doing. Even if it comes from drugs, it's still $50 and it will be used to be spent on clothing, which then stimulates. And I'm not saying I believe this. I'm saying this is how the syllogism of their equation works to brainwash you. Is that the $50 will be spent somewhere along the way by somebody who wants to buy a shirt, which will stimulate a tailor, which will stimulate somebody who wants to order cotton and the materials for the buttons.
It's like a mutagenic money velocity model that just it's so weird, man.
Oh, it's completely mystical. It's really, and that's really what the whole invisible hand, the magically self-regulating systems of the unbounded marketplace. It's all mystical. It's all magical. And the people who promoted it to begin with never believed it. That's why Lord Shelburne didn't believe in the mystical hand of the marketplace. That's why he sponsored Smith to cook up this hogwash, because they just, want people to be mystified and not think reasonably about their past, future, and how they're going to have a better future for their kids. They don't want them to use their minds, and instead just take down all government protection and let the arsonists come in and steal. Let the invisible hands come in and just rob you.
let the fox design the chicken coop.
Yeah, exactly. So anybody who thinks that freedom of free trade is freedom or libertarianism is liberty, it's the word is similar, but that's where it ends.
Right. Exactly correct. Mathew, where do you there's a lot of things that have occurred in the last several months here in the United States, and the world is aghast at what's happening. There's a lot of trepidation, especially in the transatlantic. The entire transatlantic world is basically going through a systemic shock. We have RCEP, the RCEP, biggest trade deal ever signed. I was talking about it back in 2012, and it happened just 2 weeks ago or so. RCEP is already signed up. The multipolar world is just growing in power, and we in the West are dying the death of 1,000 cuts, man. Like, how do you see all of this? I mean, this is like, at what point do the adults step back in the room, Mathew?
Well, yeah, I mean, as I think your viewers have been watching the events proceed since, especially the 6th of January, there has been, I mean, we're entering the storm, right? This is a period, and we've been in the storm, but it's getting more acute than it has been. I've personally, just to say a couple of comments on that, and then maybe we could jump to what you just brought up about the RECEP and the multipolar alliance globally. I mean, we're being hoodwinked. And again, when you look at what just looking summarily on things like the Off Guardian, Gateway Pundit, I mean, there's a lot of evidence that has shown me, in my mind, that any idea that Trump is to blame for what happened, or even that what happened, because what we're being told happened in terms of the violence, all of this crazy stuff in Washington, D.C., actually wasn't really the case. There's a lot of video evidence, people on the ground, other things that is available for people to watch and recognize that, you know, there was likely mass infiltration of Antifa groups that were coordinated, brought in to be shit disturbers. But also you have things like the police. There's video evidence of the police just opening up the gates and allowing these more radical groups to just enter. And then you have video from within the actual Capitol building itself, where these people are walking, obeying the little velvet cords, you know, as they're walking, kind of just like taking pictures of things, not really having a clue what's going on. So there's a lot to indicate that we are being intellectually manipulated right now. And when Trump just gave his, you know, reasonable call saying, you know, thank you, I feel your pain, but it's time to go home, he was immediately censored. And now we're being told this is a complete insurgency on the institutions of the sacredness of democracy of America. And, you know, Trump's accounts are being shut down. We've got Rick Klein from ABC, the news director, saying we have to take this as an opportunity to get rid of Trump thought from America, that's really what has to be destroyed. So you have what I've seen many analysts describe as many parallels to the Reichstag fire of 1933 after Hitler became chancellor.
No way, really?
Yeah. I mean, in many ways, not that there was an actual fire in this case, but just like the Reichstag fire was an inside job where they blamed communist insurgents for conducting this terrorist operation. Thus, you had the enabling acts that were supposedly these temporary orders, right, to revoke habeas corpus, freedom of speech for the greater good, and gave Hitler these incredibly powerful, expansive powers. We have similar talk by big tech, big media, and other things, and you know, discussions for using the 25th Amendment against Trump and other things. It's a bloody mess. And I think that, again, just looking at the Reichstag fire thing, the actual Nazis running it, they were really afraid. And it's always good to look at who were they afraid of, because in 1932 in January was the election of Chancellor Kurt von Schleicher in Germany, who was more of like this Friedrich List American system industrialist who gained power. And he was the chancellor. He was elected democratically with a landslide victory, much like Trump was. He had a similar policy to the New Deal of Franklin Roosevelt. They were both renewing the American system. Schleicher thought that he had things figured out, but before he could really go to war with the Bank of International Settlements and the Bank of England that had its tentacles in Germany.
Tower of Basel.
Yeah, I like that. Basically, there was a soft coup in 33 in January. Hitler was brought in as his replacement, and then within just months, you had the Reichstag burning. The enabling acts then caused a new derailment where Schleicher and all of his leading allies were eliminated under the Night of the Long Knives of 34. Uh-huh. Mm-hmm. I think that you're in a situation based on the collapsing economic order.
It's funny you should say that, because I actually tweeted out that we are right now in the Night of the Long Knives. That's funny you should say that. Yeah,
I think that is something seriously that has to be kept in people's minds. I do think that there is a strong, very powerful movement that has sprung up over the last 4 years, and I do think that, and I hope that I at this point I can't comment on the details. I can provide sort of strategic context.
Sure.
I hope to God that Trump has backup plans, and that some of the stuff that he's been saying about agreeing to a peaceful transition. I'm hoping that that is hyperbole or deflection. I have no reason to believe or I've little reason to believe that that is deflection, but I hope it is. But right now, that people have to think very differently, and I'm quite persuaded that there is hope, but people have to think top down about the multipolar alliance as a global phenomenon, which is the only serious threat to the unipolar structures of the empire centered in London to this very day. There's no other power structure or alliance existent. So if they want to have reasonable hope, and not the type of hope that might just go up in smoke very easily and have you crumble, as I've had many of my friends on who followed my Canadian Patriot writings, many of them who had hope only because of Trump for 4 years. Now they're falling into despair, and they're sort of. I've had messages and emails to me saying, I hope this is the rapture. It's like, you've just given up. That's a suicidal. You're basically saying, I'd rather die. I'd rather, than live in this world of despair. I mean, that is just death to any possible solution orientation from an organized citizenry. So people do need to organize, but they do need to think about top-down policy. You brought up the RECEP, if you want to say something about that for your audience who may not know.
I think it's important here. I think, Matt, you and I, we have experience with this. I've done a lot of business with plenty of contacts in the Far East. I think in order for us, especially the audience here, to understand this, look, guys, let me explain something to you. A great deal of the American public has been completely blindsided and hoodwinked into believing that China is the biggest threat to the United States, that China is the rival, and that China was involved in the election steal, that China was involved in the troubles that the United States is in.
Yeah.
Nothing could be further from the truth. It is actually a deflection. The heart of the matter has always been the City of London Corporation. When you look at every single banking deal, when you look at the money, I don't care about the rhetoric. Do not believe DC. You got guys like Ben. Look, there's some things that Ben says I like. There's a lot of things he says that I'm like, dude, this guy's just off the wall, right? He's not zeroing on the problem. The problem is not the CCP. Let me explain something to you guys. When the new Silk Road was being built, do you know how many times we were invited to partake in a multi-trillion-dollar build-out that is an augmented, what Mathew would call an open economic system? It is a modular, open economic system that you will build upon. Any country could partake, okay? You know what we did? We gave them the finger. That's what we did. You know what? When they invited us, you know what we did? Obama did the pivot towards Asia. Okay? And so that started the militarization of the South China Sea. Yeah. China's biggest weak point, they understand this, is the Strait of Malacca. And what we've seen over the last decade is what is known as the escape from Malacca. Why is the Strait of Malacca so damn important? Is because that is where the vast majority of their energy flows through. And that's why China has been feverishly working to develop land pipelines and oil and underground pipelines with the Russians and the Iranian energy deals there, and also Yemen. People don't realize China's been the oldest power involved in Yemen since 1954. So the conflict that you have with British and American deep state intelligence assets in Yemen, okay, in Yemen, is they are trying to pinch, once again, the lifeblood and energy of an economy. Oil is the lifeblood. Okay, folks? Mm-hmm. So we've had multiple opportunities to be part of the new Silk Road. And the deep state scumbag politicians that run DC said no. Because why? Who are they really in? So they'll blame China. They'll blame Russia. You will never, ever hear them bring blame or attention to the real dragon. And that is the one that sits in a 10-block radius in the heart of London, called the City of London Corporation. Matt, I think you got to expand on that a little bit more than I can, buddy.
No, that's great. I love these interviews with you, V, man. That's great that you've got You're in tune. You're in tune with this. So yeah, the fact is, and I mean, I'm not here to glorify everything about China and say it's all great.
Exactly.
I'm not here to do that, right?
No.
They're okay. But in the same measure, when you look at the causal nexus of world history for the past 400 years, let's take that as a sliver. What you have are two opposing paradigms that, on the one hand, are represented by the City of London parasite, and the City of London became the center of world power at a time when the Venetian oligarchy, those families that had migrated from the collapsing Roman Empire in 1450s to 500s, when those families settled in the lagoons of Venice and sort of set up shop to do the same thing with a bit of modified twists for the next several hundred, almost 1,000 years of, I mean, Venice was known as the center of world finance. Right. Marco Polo's father and Polo himself had unique Venetian license to do sole trading through Mongol-controlled territories. The Mongolians only trusted the Venetians, but why was that? Because the Venetians had one of the most integrated intelligence services that were able to map out all of the weaknesses, psychological profiles of every single kingdom and court of Europe, going all the way to Russia, Kiev, Russia. And they were able to provide certain things in return for the rights of trading and other things through the territories that the Mongolian hordes under the Khans were able to destroy and subvert. And it was a really brutal process. Now, Venice, again,
Matt, real quick, it's very important that people understand that the Venetian bankers were the forerunners to the City of London Corporation. They were the proto form to the Venetian bank to the City of London. The first bank was the first deposit bank. The idea of a deposit bank was birthed in Venice by the Venetian bankers, and that model also went into Sweden with the creation of the Riksbank, which was the first central bank. That's important that people understand this. Go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, and one of the things that people miss out on often is that this thing is reactive. It's not a creative force. It creates when it's forced to adapt and react to something good and spontaneous and loving in human beings. When human beings are acting in a natural, mature way, you get things like Leonardo da Vinci, Dante Alighieri. You get these incredible people, despite the fact of their low birth, right? They weren't born from noble families and had noble bloodlines, not usually. But in spite of that, there was something that they awoke within their own hearts that allowed their minds and hearts to integrate and their will to develop freely in conformity with their reason, so that their instincts were honed in a very beautiful and natural way that, as an effect, we see took the form of these massive discoveries in astronomy, in science, in medicine, in the arts, in music. So you have these bursts of Promethean fire, and I guess that's one way of saying it. Promethean fire, this idea of the figure of Aeschylus, who stole fire from the gods, right, and shared it with man, and was punished by Zeus, who represented sort of that imperial mode of organizing society. He basically was tortured for 10,000 years for the crime of sharing knowledge and with humankind, who he saw had this greater potential if it was given to them to develop it. So the empire is reactive. They want to smother that, and they're forced to either, if they can't smother it completely with, like, let's say, an inquisition burning the scientists, what they'll do is then say, well, let's say that we like it. Let's say we like science, since we can't get rid of it. But what we'll do instead is we will redefine what science is and the method that gave us this formula. So we can keep the formula, but the entire qualitative method of thinking of a Da Vinci, who was doing work on waves, on hydrodynamics, on many things, we're going to extract his method of thinking so people don't actually internalize how this formula came into being. So they can only use these techniques, right, to manipulate nature, that you can get good effects with them, but you can't discover within yourself the same thing that creative force that person tapped into when they made their discoveries. So you put sort of a cage, an invisible cage, onto the system. Financially speaking, this comes in the form of private central banking monetarist practices, where you say the nation is only allowed to do what the mathematical rules of banking and accounting say that we can do. So, how is money generated? Well, you have tax, you have to loot and tax either your people. When you can't tax your people, your peasants anymore, what you can do is sell off your land, loot your land, maybe to a private investor, or maybe go to war and try to steal and loot from a neighbor. That's the only permissible forms of accumulation of capital permitted under that type of system. And money investments by bankers will only tend to accommodate those types of activities of war making. Or increasingly, what was innovated through Amsterdam was speculation. So taking principles of gambling and making money without earning it became more and more of a practice that we saw really contaminating Amsterdam after, and this was brought in by, again, the Venetian controls. Amsterdam was, at the time of the early 1500s, one of the late 1500s, early 1600s, it was a center of creative growth of Republican values. You had the Flemish uprisings against the Spanish Empire, which was one of the most smallest states, including in the Netherlands, that organized themselves in a really moral, high-minded way against the most powerful empire of the world, and many similarities to what the American colonists did a century and a half later. But this was smothered by corruption, and the Bank of Amsterdam was a private central bank again, set up in 1609 as part of the merger between the Dutch and British East India companies. That also was a merger that happened around that same time, 1608, 1609. And they were corrupted from within. And at a certain point, about 80 years later, when Britain still had a very strong humanist impulse that had to be smothered, the forces of Thomas More, who was beheaded by Henry VIII in the 1530s, Erasmus, Shakespeare. These traditions were still very strong in Britain that had not yet become an empire at the end of the 17th century, and that had to be smothered. And they did it with the Glorious Revolution, right? So at the time, the city of London was not a world hub of control. It existed, but it wasn't like a center of evil at the time. It was more benign. And basically what they did with the 1688 Glorious Revolutions, they took their puppet Dutch King William III of Orange, and they basically installed him as the new king of England, and then brought in a new, Dutch modeled, Swedish modeled private central bank called the Bank of England in 1695. And with that came a new way of thinking about economics that prevented the manufacturing, the development of manufacturers or infrastructure improvements, either in Britain itself or within its colonies, who wanted to have those things. And so there was a fight, and to this very day, it never went away, but you had one last resistance from within Britain that ended with Queen Anne's poisoning and death in 1714. That was probably the very last serious resistance from within the empire itself before Britain really took on this full-blown, hopeless empire case. Now, there's good people within Britain, don't get me wrong. I see that there are still these humanist traditions that are there, and it's great. But as a system, it is an evil system of banking and of intelligence agencies that are enmeshed. China has nothing to do with that causal nexus of history of global depopulation, world government. When China did certain things, especially with, for example, Maoism, that led into the Cultural Revolution, that traumatized a lot of. That was not a good experience, and thank God that Deng Xiaoping in the 70s basically said, "Look, guys, we screwed up. You're allowed to criticize Mao. We formally treated him like a god. That was wrong, and so that created at least a little bit of space for them to start processing some of their trauma, the Chinese. But overall, China was always induced to react for its own survival to policies that were evil. When Kissinger went there and said, "Okay, look, we'll help you for the first time get out of feudalism in the 70s," right? He said, "Well, you will, under the new economic model, because we here in the developed West are going to start going post-industrial. We're going to get rid of our manufacturing. So someone's still going to do that work. Why not you? You're underdeveloped enough so that your labor is really cheap, and you need that anyway. Well, you make some money." Deng Xiaoping was like, "Okay, let's do that. They have tons of poverty. It was a third world country. They're like, "Okay, let's do this." But it was done under the condition that you have a one-child policy. So the IMF, the World Bank, these technocrats basically said, okay, if you do that, if you do the one-child policy thing, we'll let you go with this plan. You can start accessing industrial development for your first time.
Yeah, and that's something they never tell the Western constituency and the Western population, is the one-child policy was something that was enacted by the West in exchange for industrial development. Same reason why when people are like, how come Africa can't develop? Well, simple. When you shackle them with IMF, regulations and World Bank loans that they have no way of repaying, and then you tell them, well, we need a nuclear power plant. Maybe we need a refinery. Maybe we need some coal-fired power plants. No. You could have some solar panels. Mm-hmm. You could have some windmills. But we can't develop an industry or a country on that. Oh, that's okay. You don't need to. This is why certain parts of the world, for the longest time, under the transatlanticists, have been underdeveloped and lagging. And now the transatlanticists are freaking out. Why? Because the rest of the world do not need them.
That's right. That's right. And that's really what Americans need to really tap into mentally, because there's too many cases where Americans think just me first, like my nation is everything. And they're very ignorant about the ways of other cultures, what else is going on globally, and they very easily, through that ignorance, become susceptible to explanatory narratives that are dishonest coming at them from such CIA operations like Falun Gong that runs the Epoch Times, which does really good coverage of the coup attempts in the United States against Trump. Don't get me wrong. Yeah. There is good material in there that is useful, as we see also from some stuff Steve Bannon says about the coup is useful as they are. But when it comes to giving people a picture of the cause of these things that they don't like, they deflect it entirely away from the actual center of evil of Britain and the structures there, and they put it all on China, Iran, and Venezuela. So that can only occur, that sleight of hand can only occur by people not getting some basic elementary facts of their own history, and also they don't understand what China is actually doing. When you look at the multipolar alliance, and again, the 14 nations that are part of the Regional Economic Cooperation Economic Program of the Pacific that was just signed, this is a development complex that respects the sovereignty of individual nations that participate in the Belt and Road and Maritime Silk Road, but it allows for individual nations to have their own developmental pathways. It's not like a one-size-fit-all thing. So it's
a complete opposite of the transatlanticists. It's a complete opposite of the British model. Complete opposite of colonial Europe. Complete opposite. Go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, it's very rigid. It's very mathematical. The unipolar model of the transatlanticists, who are trying to manage a great reset and technocratic world regime, they're basically mathematicians. Okay, they want the equation in mathematics. The equation always has to balance. What you do on this side has to balance with this side. That's fine in the abstract realm of just linear manipulation of quantized ideas that we wrap in symbols. It has application. There's some similarity to the outside world that responds to those concepts. That's what we can get. We can apply math to engineering and we get positive results. We can make all sorts of calculations. So it's not to say we should disregard math, but to assume that the entire universe, the physical space-time, the life, the mind, all of these metaphysical processes that shape and organize the flow of creation are somehow beholden to the constraints of our mathematical language is insane. But that's how they think. That's where you get the term ivory tower, right? They're just in their tower. There's no connection to the real world, and they're just putting their theoretical thoughts on paper and forgetting, or not forgetting, but those thoughts then somehow they want the world to respond and adapt to their thoughts, even if the nature of the world that they're trying to manipulate has no correspondence to their assumptions, but they do it anyway. So when you're dealing with the multipolar alliance and the banking system that's been created through the Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank and the New Development Bank and the China State Banks and the Export-Import Bank and the different alternative you don't have to just have the SWIFT credit systems. There's an alternative model of doing foreign investments in the Eurasian system. It's all based on a fluid, flexible approach. You know generally what you want. Like we have these diagrams, the Belt and Road Initiative, its extensions into Africa, in South America. We got a sense of it as a broad stroke, right? Like if you're an artist, you do a thumbnail sketch. You don't know exactly what form it's going to take. It's a multi-decadal project that also has aspects to space development as well as quantum computing and other aspects to it. But the point is, you have your general sketch, and then you get creative. You deal with problems as you come to them. What we do know is that they're building high-speed rail across the board. China has 5 different programs for magnetic levitation rail that are underway, being built as we speak. In the West, we have 0. We never did it.
What about the U.S.? We have trains that go 80 miles an hour and it derails.
Yeah, and we celebrate 80 miles as somehow a great, incredible thing.
Meanwhile, they have trains that go 400 and change.
Exactly. I mean, and they have prototypes already set up in a vacuum tube with magnetic, magnetic levitation
a
that
real
can go
hyperloop.
1,000 kilometers an hour.
Right,
yeah.
A real hyperloop. And the reason why I bring this up is because, folks, you have to understand what happened in 1776. People just think, oh, we won. It's the independent. No. What happened in 1776 was the first attempt at a modular, open economic system. And if you go back and listen to Mathew Ehret's prior interviews, Matt really gets deep into that. It's very important that you understand that. What's happening with the New Silk Road, folks, this is the second time. This is the second time in human history where an open source modular system is being, again, implemented in the world.
Mm-hmm. You know what I would say? It's actually more than the second time, because you not only
third time, right?
More than that. This is where history gets so interesting. But not only did you have, I didn't extrapolate on that. Maybe we could include a link to my international dimensions of 1776 article. I'll email it to you, and you could put it in the description box, maybe. But yeah, the fact that Benjamin Franklin, and I'll say a few other examples. Benjamin Franklin organized the Catherine the Great, leading figures within the Russian Academy of Sciences under Ekaterina Dashkova, the young female 30-something-year-old president reformer of the Russian Academy of Sciences. I mean, this is stuff that we don't appreciate today. But to basically organize the League of Armed Neutrality that ensured that the American Revolution would not be contaminated or subverted by British shipping, as well as supplies were provided to the young revolutionaries during the 6-year program that involved the fight against the empire. You had similar assistance from leading Republican figures like Kosciuszko of Poland, who came in and trained farmers to become actual, elite soldiers who were capable of conducting proper organized guerrilla warfare against the biggest empire in the world. Again, the farmers, right? This is a huge deal that people underappreciate. You had India, Hyder Ali and Tipu Sultan, his son, who
Mysore Rebellion.
Mysore Rebellion. They were able to do that consciously, knowing that they were going to pull 20% of the British fleet away from fighting the colonists in the Americas and pull them into trying to suppress the Mysore Rebellion, which they failed to do. I mean, the British. And Tipu Sultan writes letters to the Continental Congress saying, "Our hearts are with you. Our fight is won." And it goes beyond that. The Sultan of Morocco as well, Sidi Mohammed, the Emperor of Morocco, provided protection to the American ships against Barbary pirates that were being organized and given intelligence by the British. So it was an international phenomenon, and the idea was to always create a new form of government that had only been sort of in a concept from Plato's Republic all the way to Augustine's City of God, to Thomas More's Utopia, to Dante Alighieri's work of the De Monarchia, to Cusa's work of Concordantia Catholica. I mean, there was always this living, organic conception that organized and inspired different generations around this idea of humankind organized according to natural law, where the reality of our having been made in the living image of God would be not just words that you heard as a sermon, but rather was an active living part of our organizing, our self-organizing of our political economies. And Martin Luther King Jr., when you listen to his speeches, and he's talking eloquently about the idea of good law versus false law, bad law, that it's when a good law is a good law when it squares with the laws of justice, of God's law. When it's out of whack and in defiance of God's law, of the laws of nature, then it's not legitimate. So keep that in mind, because the British Empire were telling Benjamin Franklin and the young revolutionaries, what you're doing is illegal. We have laws in our code books, and there was a higher idea that no, we're obedient to the law of nature, the book of nature. That's what we read, not your legal books. Right. So this was an idea that spread like electric fire around the world, and it was only subverted because it needed to work in France for it to then spring up in other countries. And France was the biggest supporter of the United States. It wasn't just Marquis de Lafayette, but even the King, Louis XVI, offered big
troops.
Support. Yeah, they sent tons of troops, and that turned the tides in favor of the Americans.
And then they got paid back with the Jacobin Revolution.
Yeah, exactly. And the original figures, and this brings us back to how we began this interview, because we talked about false polarizations, dualities, and top-down versus bottom-up thinking, right? The von Hayek school of the Austrian school tends to be what you might call they're bottom up in the sense that they believe in no regulation, right? That everybody's animal instincts and passions will, when left unbounded to pursue and maximize their pleasure and reduce their pain, will just naturally result in self-regulating systems of the marketplace that reward excellence and punish laziness, and somehow good will happen and empires will weaken. That's really what there's layers of intellectual veneer above it, but that's really essentially what it is. And on the opposing school, you have the cold, calculating eugenicist Keynesians. Not to say everybody who thinks that they're a Keynesian is eugenicist, but that's what Keynes was. Who think that you have to control the consumption patterns from a top-down grouping of experts.
It's technocracy.
Very logically heavy-minded, no soul. So that schism of mind and soul, expressed in the way it does, that was what was capitalized on by British intelligence in the subversion of the French Revolution and the creation of the Jacobin bloody terror. Because what did they have? Basically, Lafayette wasn't a leader at a certain point of the French Revolution. Why did he lose power? Why did he have to escape to Austria and become somebody who sat in an Austrian dungeon for 5 years? Why did that happen? Why wasn't he leading it? Even though everyone at the beginning of the revolution in 1789, they were like, Marquis Lafayette is the president. He is the man. And he had all of the qualifications for being a president, being the leader, but it didn't happen. Why? Why didn't all of the Ben Franklin networks as well, like Jean Sylvain-Bailly, the mayor of Paris, he was the first president of l'Assemblée nationale, who declared the Declaration of the Rights of Man and the Tennis Court Oath, modeled on the U.S. Declaration of Independence in July 1789. Why didn't he become a leader when he was the spark plug that drove the thing with Lavoisier, the founder of modern chemistry, who was also part of this group? Why did they lose their heads? Why were their heads cut off when they were obviously revolutionaries? Well, this is how you get, the false dualism. So you had the Jacobin terror, these rabble rousers, Antifa types of their day, who were deployed on the payroll, Danton, Marat, Robespierre. These were people who were in constant coordination with British intelligence, Lord Shelburne, the same guy that brought us Adam Smith. Yep. And these rabble rousers were able to take direct the rage of the mob that had been abused for generations, that didn't have a lot of education, but they had a lot of pain. And that pain was able to be challenged towards destroying everybody who was had a semblance of being part of the elite. Whether you were a good person, a scientist, or whether you were a shithead, it didn't matter. You were going to die. So that resulted in a few years of just, it was a mess of anarchy. And people, it maintained a semblance of reality because there was a lot of primitive accumulation of capital throughout the aristocratic, castles, where they were just reaping the harvests of the peasants for so many generations that they had a lot of money in the treasuries, a lot sitting in the mansions to be stolen. So they were able to, take control of the riches and redistribute. So that sort of kept a semblance of stability and people passive. But when the treasuries wore down and there was nothing left to steal, again, people saw that, okay, we can't feed ourselves. Nobody's producing bread properly. Like, it was a basket case. And that created a backlash of what? The Girondins. The Girondins were what? They were these logicians saying, emotions are evil. Look what emotions caused us. That's what freeing your emotions allows is anarchy. And thus we need, as a solution, a counterpoint was basically just, we're going to have a 10-day, we're going to use the decimal system to reorganize the calendars, the work week, times the day, and it basically became, and they just killed all of the leading Jacobins until that didn't work at a certain point of cold dictatorship, of top-down control, and then there was a backlash and their heads were cut off, and that went on for a while until Napoleon was able to fill the vacuum. So, and who funded Napoleon, right? You have letters from Lord Rockwell. Exactly. So, and he was like a proto-fascist of his own day.
Of course.
And ultimately, when 1815 rolled around, and Napoleon was finally put down, that was 20 years of just destruction. And you had people in America, in the United States, working very hard to keep the United States out of getting enmeshed in that shit show. Because Hamilton, Washington made a point, like, Europe is really insane since the bloodbaths of France. We can't get ourselves pulled into that insane world of empire. If you do, you can't get out. It's like The Godfather, right? You try to get it, take a step out, they pull you back in.
Yeah, exactly right. And this is what people don't get, man. It's like, here we have again the American system. People need to understand, if you could quickly put in a nutshell what the American system was, what FDR was trying to do, and I think if people understand what the American system is, and you talk about it, guys like Harley Schlanger talk about it, the American system and how important it is, and how it's different from the schools of thought, these competing popular schools of thought, the Keynesianism, the Van Hecks of the world, the Mises of the world. This is important that people grasp this. So go ahead, Matt. Explain to the public what the American system truly is, and the similarities between that and the One Belt, One Road. Go ahead, Matt.
Great question. How? What do we have? 5-10 minutes?
We got. Let's go 5 minutes.
Okay. All right.
Let's go 10 minutes. The hell with it. I'll move some things around. We'll go 10 minutes.
Wild, man. All right. So, okay. And I didn't say, just to finish, actually, one thought. I know I'm going to forget it forever. That was one example of the win-win system coming about and being crushed. You also had periods after the Civil War when the system that was brought back online by Lincoln went global, and you had the Russians, the French, the Japanese adopting the system, and then it was crushed by World War I. It was subverted. So this age of a multipolar alliance was again forced back into the womb, so to speak. I guess that's a nasty and proper way of thinking about it. It's like a new civilization being born that the empire is just constantly trying to keep back in the womb. Sorry for the imagery, but it's really it's that unnatural. And then it came about again when Franklin Roosevelt was organizing against Churchill and the Bank of England, that was represented by John Maynard Keynes in the Bretton Woods Conference of 1944, which I write about in part 1. Actually, they can get it on my website. Where again he had a program for a China, Russia, U.S.-led multipolar alliance to internationalize the New Deal, and the Bretton Woods systems of the World Bank, the IMF, the fixed exchange rates. All of these things were designed to destroy speculation and provide long-term lending to other countries in Africa and other, Asia, South America, with the help of the United States as somebody who would help them develop full spectrum economies like the U.S. had gone largely to do from 1933 to 45. So again, that was only subverted by a series of convenient deaths from 1945 to 47, the creation of the Cold War with Churchill's Iron Curtain speech, and the new FBI, CIA, dictatorship that really screwed up a lot of people's minds. And there were penetrations in Asia, in China, with Bertrand Russell's networks there that were organizing an anarchist program under the Gang of Four that did a lot of damage, as well as in Russia after Stalin was killed. And I say killed for a reason, but after that, there was and Stalin did a lot of bad things too, don't get me wrong, but I'm saying that he at least believed in the FDR view of cooperation for mutual development. He didn't like or trust Churchill. But you had penetrations there with Bertrand Russell's networks creating systems of control that organized the Politburo, and a lot of British, you could just look at how many British MI6 triple agents like Kim Philby retired, they defected and went to Russia. What the hell were they doing? Why did the Russians trust these people and bring them in? so they weren't double agents, they were triple agents. They were always doing what they were supposed to do on behalf of the city of London. Even though they're called traitors by dumber people today for having defected to Russia. No. It's a sophisticated game, is what I'm saying. And then JFK did something similar by bringing things he did a valiant effort, basically, by bringing this multipolarist alliance idea onto the forefront. Protectionism, the wise use of protective tariffs to favor the development of your local industry instead of just opening up for having cheap goods dumped into your markets to destroy your indigenous manufacturing or agriculture. That's a key part of Alexander Hamilton's platform. The right to utilize state banks, like actual nation state banks, like instead of having the Federal Reserve, every nation you shouldn't have a private central bank running your monetary policy. You should have a national bank that could issue, and Hamilton talks about it in his report on a national bank that people can read. They Google that online, 1791. Through this, you can emit credit. You can emit a type of productive credit for projects that are very long-term, because the state, unlike a private enterprise, can take a loss, which when you do really big things, you often have to wait several or more years before that project is built and starts generating profit, like the Belt and Road Initiative. That's why people often attack China for being stupid, because they're building things that are like not even producing profit and just creating debt slaves. And it's like, whoa, if you actually look at what these projects are across Africa or Sri Lanka, and look at these ports and look at these rail systems and look at these industries that they're building up, they're just looking at things with a longer term perspective than your short-term mind is able to handle, because they're building things that in 5 years, when you actually have the proper industrial activity of full spectrum economics in Kenya or Sri Lanka or other countries as part of the RCEP area, they will be self-extinguishing debts. You will discover that those debts were not actually debts, because the rate of wealth creation of the system as a whole after it's built and operational is going to not only extinguish the debt you took out now to build it, but it's also going to create whole new rates of growth of free energy that you can then reinvest back into the system to improve it in research, R&D, science, technology, and other things and also the arts, like the investment of into arts academies. You want beautiful painters, musicians, dancers. You want these to do that in a proper way requires years of concentrated effort and love to your art to develop your craft and perform, such that you can then also create new states of beauty that had never existed before. That a utilitarian, right, might say that's a waste of money. These people could be plumbers, right? It's sure, but the soul exists too. There's a higher value that's more than just the material world, and that's the world that exists in nature. It's a creative world that we find, that we're made in the image of the forces that organize nature, and we prove it when we make discoveries, share them, and apply them, and find that nature, the universe, responds in a relatively measurable way, not mathematically, but relatively measurable. We can have more people at a higher quality of life when we go to space exploration and beyond, right? So this is really the greatest parallel that we have to the American system, ironically, on the earth in practice today, is coming out of the Eurasian, especially China-led Belt and Road Initiative and the alternative banking system that's there. That's ironically more American than anything we see America having done since John F. Kennedy was killed.
Bingo. Very well said. Mathew Ehret, the man, the gentleman, the scholar himself. Thank you so much for joining us, man. I really appreciate it. We need to do this more often, my friend. As regularly as possible. People love it. This is now's the time that people understand the origins of everything and understand where to lay blame. Understand, know who your enemy is. Know who your enemy is, because a lot of people that are listening to this, they're just completely blindsided. They're looking at the wrong place. You need to look back to that 10-block strip in the heart of the city of London called the City of London Corporation. That's what it's all about. Matt, thank you so much. Again, folks, you can check out his work right there in the description box. Matt, give out your website and also any sort of social media so people can follow you.
Absolutely. So they can go to canadianpatriot.org, or visit a nonprofit organization that I created with my wife, Cynthia, about a year and a half ago, called risingtidefoundation.net. There's obviously, if you're inspired by the work, we have lectures every week on Sundays. You can write us an email, take part in those, make a donation as well. There's options all over the website to help out, because that's always needed for ammunition, as you know. And yeah, just stay in touch and get active.
Very well said. And with that being said, folks, we are over and out. Enjoy your weekends. Again, subscribe, like, comment, and share if you haven't subscribed yet to Rogue. This is the preeminent geopolitical, geostrategic, geoeconomic news site on YouTube, period. And we're out.